Welcome to the Don't Let the Smile Fool You podcast, where we're talking about everything happening beneath the smile as you climb the leadership ladder. Let's go. Hey, Lucy.
Hey Uche, how are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm very well today. Very well. Very well. Looking
Yeah.
forward to seeing you this afternoon.
Well, first of all, looking forward to an amazing conversation today, and I think a well needed conversation as well. So, we
Absolutely.
have Lucy Quist, who needs no introduction, host of the Bold New Normal podcast. And if you don't know about Lucy Quist, please run, not walk, and listen to her podcast, just talking about really amazing stuff, the future of our country, and also has the Bold New Normal conference coming up really soon. So please look her up. Okay, so Lucy, did I do a good job of introducing you?
An amazing job. Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. This is going to
That's
be a
good.
wonderful conversation.
So, if you don't know, Lucy and I have known each other for a really long time. We worked together at Vodafone many years ago. And by now, you would have heard our podcast on that as well. So, this is a follow up interview. We thought that went really well. And we said, why not dig a little deeper into some of the conversations that we already had? So,
Absolutely.
Lucy, one of the things I mentioned in our last conversation was just the way you come into an organization. You know, I talked about your first couple of weeks at Vodafone and how we were all like, what's happening? But I wanted to get a sense of, what's your thought about when you're first going into an organization? What does that look like for you? What's your game plan,
Yeah.
when you first come in? It doesn't have to be about, a former company, just generally.
Yeah,
You know,
generally.
yeah, when you're walking into an organization, what's the game plan? What's happening with you the night before?
Yeah.
What are you doing the first couple of months that you're in?
No, really
The
good question. And
organization?
I think for me, the game plan has changed over time. So
Mm.
I would say that when I was much younger, I was going in with, oh, I'm so glad they hired me. This is such a wonderful opportunity.
Thank you, thank
I'm
you.
really grateful. Thank you. Thank you. And you show up and you go, oh, thank you that you gave me a job. Oh my goodness. You know, but literally that was my mental construct for many years as a much younger person. Because I guess there's an element of the younger and the younger I was and less experienced I was, there was also less confidence in terms of what I bring to the
Your
table,
value.
exactly my value, and I didn't fully understand that. And I feel that regardless of what level you are now, I know that regardless of your level, you're hired because the organization believes you can create value regardless of, you may be junior, you may be mid-level, you may be a senior executive, but the starting point is a belief on their part that what they're asking you to come and do you can actually do. I'm not talking about the intern and so that internship we just going on, but when you're hired, it's because someone thinks you can do. So that
Mm.
was my starting point on game plan. Game plan was always full of gratitude and, oh my goodness, I made it in. And now I think about it differently, to think to myself, well, I understand that you have offered me this opportunity compared to many other potential candidates that you could have given this job to, and you chose me. So first of all, there's an agreement between us that you believe that I can do this job. And I go in thinking to myself, first of all, what am I going to do as me in this seat that's
Mm.
different from person A, B, or C? Could have been any of those other people who got the job and I got it. So there has to be a difference in me getting it. So that's number one. Very strong mental construct about what is my differentiation in that role. Number two thing I think about is that obviously when you go into a new situation, people don't know who you are. And I'm now talking broader organizations. So I think to myself, how am I going to quickly ensure that those who probably weren't involved in the decision making to get me there, who I'm going to have to work with, what is the impression I want to create with them? Right, very quickly. And tied to that, and this is probably something that you and I have in common, I know
Mm.
we have a lot in common, but especially from a coaching point of view, I
Mm.
think about what's my story. If I come into an organization afresh, every new person I meet is going to want to know my story. And I have to have that story crafted, aligned to the job I'm going to do. Because we can tell so many different stories about our
Yeah.
lives. I tell the story that's most relevant to the job I'm going to do, because that's the first impression I want people to walk away with. So A is, how am I going to do this better, be differentiated? B, what's my story? And then the third thing, which is something actually I learned very, very recently, is what does success look like in this organization,
Oof.
right?
Say
Because
it again.
it looks like different things in different organizations. And even in the same organization, it can change over time depending on who's in leadership, who's running the show. So, what does this organization view as success? I want to learn that really quickly and make that my part of my opening gambit really early to demonstrate that I can be that successful person in the organization. Yeah. So, I'm really setting the tone really quickly.
No, there's some. So I want to follow up on this question, but let me just speak to something that you said because this whole idea of what does success look like in the organization is a very important one. I think for me, this is something that I'm having to learn as well. And by the way, what success looks like today can be very different a year from now if there's a change in
Exactly.
leadership, right? So you're constantly having to evolve your style as a leader. So, for example, like I had a toolkit in terms of how I would come into an organization. And that toolkit was very sort of prescriptive as to what would happen in the first 3 months, what would happen in 6 months. But then I realized that some organizations had the patience and some didn't. So what do, right? You have to continue to find ways to evolve your
Exactly.
style, right? So I guess my question is, and I think this whole conversation, this whole point around evolution as a leader is really important because I think we sometimes confuse being your authentic self because that's the thing we like to talk about.
Yeah, I love the
Being your
term
authentic
authentic.
self with the fact that you have to constantly stretch and evolve as a leader. So I guess to the people listening out there, how have you been able to sort of have your own evolution in terms of your leadership journey?
Really, really important question. And sometimes people think that the need to evolve and the need to express your authenticity in ways that are contextually relevant is a big ask. And I say to people that it doesn't matter where you're from. When you go from one situation to another, even in the same company, if you move from the Ghana operation to the Nigeria operation to the UK operation to the different, it's all a do over because it's a different organization
Absolutely.
culture. It's not the same. So for me, as a leader, I've learned that it's so important to understand context really, really quickly, like double down on understanding context. And that's the main part of the evolution that has taken place for me because
Hmm.
we all have our natural propensity. And let me put this into sort of real concrete terms. I've known forever that I'm an extrovert, whether it's through a test or not. I don't need a test to tell me that I'm an extrovert, right? But and there's an assumption that that is the most successful or a very
Hmm.
successful leadership style, and I completely disagree. And I've learned that as a leader. If you asked me this a number of years ago, I would say, absolutely, all you need to be is an extrovert and talk a lot, and blah, blah, blah. But actually, as a leader, if you don't learn to strike a balance between what comes to you naturally and what is opposite to you to that, you will overplay your natural strengths
Hmm.
and they'll become weaknesses. So, sticking with the example of extroversion, yes, I have the confidence to speak up and be heard. But if I'm in a room and I'm the only one always speaking up, even if it's just a team setting and not a boardroom setting, guess what? Nobody else is going to speak up. And guess what? Our ability to create, ideate, solve problems is going to be limited to my capacity. Now, who needs a team that's limited to one leader's
One
capacity,
voice.
right? Because you have
Absolutely.
you're in a leadership position. So regardless of the culture you're in, most people are somewhat deferential to leadership. If on top of that you're a leader who's always going to own the mic and say everything, no one's ever going to be part of the thinking. No one's going to be part of the ideation.
Mm,
And the outcomes are going to be dependent on only you. So that's
mm,
a concrete example where I've had to evolve as a leader in the interest of getting the best outcomes, getting the best, creating the best commercial and business value by ensuring that where I know that my natural propensity can hold other people back, I learn to tone it down and hear other people and actually intentionally call out the people, not embarrass them, but call out the people who are less likely to speak up
yeah,
and go, what do you think? What's
yeah.
your opinion on this?
No, it's a good point because I mean, I'm extroverted from a workplace point of view. I'm introverted naturally, and but I do like energy, right? So I cannot work with people who are not high energy
Oh,
people.
yeah.
I can't. And to your point, you know, replicating that in your team, everyone has to be high energy is not a good thing, right? Like you sort of need the balance of people who are super high energy, go, 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 and the people who are maybe a little more cerebral in a
Yeah, more
sense.
thoughtful
Yeah.
about things. Yeah.
Yeah. So they're kind of like more thinkers and they take a step, because I tend to be very like, let's go.
Yeah.
And you need that person who's going to be like, hey, have you thought about this?
Yeah.
So you need that balance, to your point, in terms of just being a little more balanced. So your point is absolutely right, which is as leaders, you stretch in different directions. You know what I mean? To find the right balance for
Absolutely.
your role and for the organization that you're in, as well. And that's, I think, sometimes a very costly lesson because when you listen to all the gurus out there, they keep harping on, you got to be your authentic self. And people need to understand what that really means in practical terms, that it doesn't mean that you get to show up as you want. For example,
Exactly.
if your organization is an organization, maybe you work at a bank, for example, and they're very formal in their dressing. You're like, well, I'm authentic self. I'm going to roll in here in my pajamas every day. Well, guess what? That's just not going to work, right? I mean,
No, you're not going anywhere
this
really.
whole thing around being your authentic self, like we need people to understand what that means practically.
Totally. And to that point, part of showing up, and I described, with the extroversion example, I described a bit around, engagement style. But to your point, even physical style is really
Yes.
important. So when with the point when I was talking about what does success look like, because success also looks like a certain way of putting yourself together to show up.
Mhm.
Now, how do you show up? How do you show up in the way that you want to be taken seriously? If your goal is to get ahead in your career, how do you show up in your choice of words and language that are organizationally appropriate in the right moment to be taken seriously? And this is where this whole idea of authenticity, can be overplayed. It's a hand that people can easily overplay. When you're
Yeah.
hanging out with your friends, having a meal on Friday night, your authentic self in that situation is not the same authentic self on Monday morning in a boardroom meeting.
Seriously, I mean, I think, and I wanted to make this point. I think it's a good point to make just so that people understand that, because I think sometimes people feel like, well, I'm not being allowed to be myself. I'm just like, well, when you get home.
Yeah. And what is yourself? I mean, even if I take it into the personal sphere, when you're engaging, whether you're engaging a parent or a sibling or a friend, I mean, it's not all the same, authenticity.
Exactly.
So why do you want the workplace authenticity to just be any form of
An open box. I
it
mean,
can't be. It can't be.
so I mean, let me ask a different question. In terms of your own evolution as a leader, one of the things you and I have talked about is, our time in Vodafone was a point of transition for us, right? We both went on to become CEOs. Lucy was the first woman CEO in telco in Ghana. And so
I love you say
this
the way you say it so easy. First of all, thank you. but
It's
I also know that you did the same in another country, madam. Right? When you went to DRC, it hadn't happened before. So can we just sort of dial it back here and let's give you your flowers. Congratulations, well
true.
done, Idris, because I know that's not an easy place to hold such a
Oh
role.
yeah. No, I mean we both I think, we both made some very bold decisions, right? And you went on to become the CEO at another company. So talking about evolutions, I just want to link it back to that and perhaps share a bit about this. But the thing around your leadership journey, you were at this our former company. We've told the story about how we lost our sponsor and we lost our opportunities,
Yeah.
and so you went on to take this role as CEO at a different company. And the question I want to ask in terms of your leadership journey is, you now went on to take this job, which had been a dream of yours, right? This is something, this is a goal you'd set for yourself. You'd said you wanted to be a CEO from day one. This was something you wanted to do. And now you're in the role. And all of a sudden, what success looks like has changed, right? In terms of your time and your journey at that next company wasn't it didn't go as you expected, right? So can you just share a bit around that and what that meant for you in terms of wanting something so much? This idea of chasing what we think should be the next step.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Um, I it's it's feels exhilarating when you get to that point of the thing that you think is the ultimate goal,
Hmm.
and you get there. And I will talk a bit more about the experience of it. But here's a point that it may surprise some people. Once I got there, and I've reflected on this over the past few years, part of me, I think, forgot to set a new goal, a new ambitious goal. Not just so we can come back to that, but a new sort of big thing. You have the big thing in your mind, and you work on it for years, and you get there. I think at somewhere along the line, creating that new next thing didn't happen. But we'll come back to
Because
that.
you felt you had arrived,
Well,
basically.
yeah, I
Was
think
it that?
the attribution, and people have asked me this question. I didn't feel that I had arrived as in I was the best thing ever in the
No,
world.
no,
Not
no.
in
But
that sense. It was that
I've
I
reached the
achieved
goal.
it, and
Yes,
that
that's
is
what I meant.
dangerous.
Yeah.
But for me, getting into the role, and feeling that I had been prepared sufficiently, not just on a personal level, but like you said, our sponsor and so on, we'd had the right coaching and leadership and guidance. So I was quite confident about doing the job itself. But then arriving and realizing that, in as much as I may think, and this is back to my point about how I show up, you may think that you're the right person to start and enter a role. Not everybody agrees with you, by
Hmm.
the way. So I got there, and this business needed a turnaround. No doubt about it. And we all know that turnaround situations are tough. You need to make commercial decisions, but you need to make some tough people decisions as well when
Hmm.
it comes to a turnaround. And in this context, what was even worse was that culturally, several of my colleagues felt that they had arrived, as in the company had arrived, and there was no more headroom. So you come into a situation where culture has become one of almost like, this is as far as we're gonna go.
Hmm.
And I tell you this because I actually had a colleague actually come into my office and say to me, you seem like a nice person, nice new boss and all, but yeah, I think we've gone as far as we're going to go. This is real conversation. you know, I had another colleague, again, well-meaning, came to me and goes, I've never had a woman as a boss before. So yeah, this is going to be interesting. I love the look on your face.
I'm sorry. What?
Yes. So specifically to the question you're asking, I realized then in those conversations, and these are two examples, that it wasn't enough feeling that I was ready for the job and I had ideas on how we're going to turn this around. But actually, I was going to have to double down and create belief in the organization. So, completely different hat. Remember, you and I had come from an environment that, because
Yeah.
of our boss, everybody was like on it and running with it. I was in
Hmm.
a situation where that wasn't there. And in addition to that, almost consistently take ownership of showing up with my authenticity that spoke to my expectations daily. And
Hmm.
that can be a huge amount of pressure on yourself daily, because no one's perfect. So as much as we have our framework of our values and expectations of ourselves, it's not going to be perfect every day. But knowing full well that I couldn't afford not to be all the things that I believed in on any given day, because I was trying to create a culture and a people and an organizational shift that I literally had to embody every day. So for me, that was on the local organizational front, where there was a big shift that needed to be made. But if I think more broadly about my stakeholders, like shareholders and owners and so on, that was equally a big lift, because it's interesting how so many human beings still think of um, professions as gendered, and people still
Yeah,
think
of
very
course.
much that the CEO job is quote unquote a male job,
A
in
man's
terms
job.
of exactly, in
Hmm.
terms of how you behave, what you think, how you engage. And while I wasn't going to become a man, because I can't, right? First of all, it's not even a possibility. Let's put that out there, right? I can't. It was striking this balance and working through people's lack of a full understanding and belief that, I know it's funny, right? That as a woman, I can still do this as me as well. And that was a huge amount of navigation. That was tough. It was really tough, because organizationally, when you're in your local organization as CEO, you do have some degree of power that allows you to shift the organization people come
Mm.
from. When you're dealing with your bosses, your stakeholders, and so on, it's almost a persistent relitigation, revalidation, read this almost every single time you're engaging, to reprove that you're in this role because you can do it. And it changed over time, but I can tell you, it probably took at least a couple of years to get there.
Exactly. So let me just add to this for a minute, because I think that was one of the things I found really interesting. Like in one of my CEO jobs, I remember meeting one of our stakeholders, and he was just like, you're like a daughter to me. And I was just like, I'm pretty sure my father is in New Jersey, and I'm not your daughter. I just met
Would you
you.
say that to a man?
So
To
already,
a
like,
man?
trying to put you in this box, right? Because, you know, again, like if you're calling me your daughter, already you've taken away the power of my role, right? I'm meant to be soft and almost maybe subservient to you to some
Yeah.
degree as my dad. I mean, it's just, and I always ask this question, like, would they say that to the guys? You're like a son to me. Absolutely not. Nobody's ever said that to any male CEO. So this need to soften us, in these roles has always been quite interesting to me. And I've always just been like, yeah, no, I'm not your daughter,
No.
and we're not going to have that kind of relationship. So yeah, no, I get the point around.
Yeah.
It's like you're having to relitigate the fact that you're qualified.
For so long, so persistently.
Mm,
I recall one particular incident. It wasn't even an incident. It was over a couple of days. So if I say incident, I'm trivializing it.
mm,
And it took over a couple of days. And this is when I was having a transition of boss. And that was a major relitigation, because he was spending even though I'd been in the role for a while, over coming up to 2 years, he was in this mode of, I need to check whether, all over again. And it was such a tough relitigation that even my team was like, wow, do you know how
this is
you made it through
exhausting.
that? Like, do
Yeah.
you know how you, and so in that situation, it goes beyond your competence and your ability to do the job. It's about your character and how you choose to engage in that conversation,
Mm-hmm.
and not allow the person to have the excuse to say, well, because of XYZ, which may be trivial, but it may be a trivial thing that you say or do, but unfortunately, the person then uses that as ammunition. So I feel that particularly in the context of women in CEO roles, that relitigation persists. And I do believe in most executive roles for women, it happens, it still happens. But also, there's a huge burden on character, because the things that a man would say or do that would just be seen as manly or masculine, if you did the same. It's, this example of someone saying, my daughter, if you then had a direct, engaged, you know, conversation with him where you were being firm, he'd probably be taken aback and go, but that's
Yes.
my daughter level. She can't talk to me like that. And I
Yes,
think that's the
exactly.
balance we're constantly having to strike, that even when the person is wrong, we invest so much energy. In this particular instance, it took me 2 full days to get to the point of this person now saying, oh, yeah, I think maybe you have a point. 2 days, 2 exhausting days.
It's quite interesting. So, I mean, when you're dealing with that in the organization, how do you? Because it is exhausting to relitigate, as you know, Lucy. At what point are you just like, I've had enough of this? Or do you sort of dig in and say, you know what, I belong here. I'm going to continue to prove myself over and over again?
I would say your question was about at what point. In the earlier years, it's probably easier to persist and to go, I am going to just keep going and going and going. As the years go by,
Mm,
it can become too much of an overhead. And I know that this is a subject that is very dear to your heart,
mm,
and hopefully, well, not hopefully, soon people will hear a lot more from you on this. But it's about, what is that support system that you have? What is that, your word, infrastructure, if I won't go on about it, that allows you to keep going, right? And this is
yeah.
also another leadership lesson I've had to learn in the journey. The first few years, you think that, or you can almost, go it solo. And I've had men say to me, "Oh, it's lonely at the top," and yes, it is lonely at the top, but you've still got to create your support system behind you, that may not be in the room, may not be in your organization, but you need it. And if
Hmm.
we absorb this notion of it's lonely at the top, well, guess what? Lonely gets tired. Lonely can't keep doing. You can't live a lonely life and expect to keep succeeding. So, to your question, direct question, at what point? I think in the early years, you persist and you push and you push, and then at some point in the later years, you're like, actually, um, maybe I need to refresh and reposition and repoint my career in a direction that where I'd be embraced and engaged, and that becomes a decision point around, do I move on, do I leave, and where do I go to? And this goes back to the point I dropped earlier, and I didn't follow through. The difficulty is that if you don't have a game plan of the next ambition and the next thing you want to do, then you're kind of stuck, because your mind tells you it's time to make some progress, but you don't have a plan because you hadn't thought of what you're going to do next. And so, what I've learned, and this is all based on experience, I tell people now that you're in the job because you can do the job. Please
Right.
stop trying to keep proving whether you can do the job. Your job while you are doing this job is to prove to yourself and everybody else that you can do the next job. Stop trying to prove this job. You're proving
This job
for
is
the next
done. You're
job,
there. You're there. You're at the table.
right? But that's not something I always understood.
So, can I come back to that then? Because I still think that that's probably something that not everybody looks at, right? I think to a certain degree, and no matter the level you're at, you come into the role. uh, I won't use the word grateful. Let's not say that, but you've come into a role. I think for a lot of women, they're like, okay, I'm here now. You know what? I'm gonna like knock this out the park. I got to be focused for the next couple of years. They're not necessarily saying like, okay, today's January 1st, and in 2028. I want to be at. Not everyone. I'm sure
Yeah.
there are women who do that, but I would probably argue that most women probably go in focused, right? They're very focused on the task ahead of them, the job ahead of them, this particular role. Of course, they know they want to advance. We're ambitious, right? So we know that, but they haven't done the work of, so therefore I'm going to be targeting this. And I want you to be, if you can, be a little more open around and what happens when you don't have that plan and you're now finding yourself in a situation where you're like, I'm not comfortable here, but I'm not clear about what's next. What does that look like,
Ooh.
practically?
So I'll situate it in a practical example because in my previous organization, I felt that I invested so much
Mm,
energy in this idea of proving that not only did I belong, but I could do a really good job. And what that meant was that I didn't spend enough time on all of the who needs to know me, who needs to be thinking of me, who needs to be in their roadmap of the future, considering that this woman is there and she'll be perfect for this job because I had this conversation with her and I thought, wow, she knows all this other stuff that we're not making in use of. And I really kept my head down and drove and drove and drove and focused on make it work, make it work, make it work, prove yourself, prove yourself, prove yourself. What happens then is that when you reach the point where you really feel you need to make a change, and I did get to that point, you look up because before your head's down doing the work, and you look up, and anyone you engage at the time that you actually need to make a change is suddenly thinking, "Oh,
mm.
you sorry, you need what do you need
What do
now?"
you want?
Yeah,
Who are you?
because now you're pushing for it. They're not pulling you for it. You're pushing for it. And then I subsequently set up all these meetings, all these conversations. Oh, I want to talk to you about XYZ, what the coming up in your opportunity. I'm looking to it. That's the wrong time. That's
Mm,
way too late. And I learned that directly, the hard way. What we need to do is understand that we're there because we're given the job because we can do it. Organizational obstacles, difficulty, challenges to getting a job done perfectly, especially when we're ambitious. We want everything to be perfect. It's not always going to be that, right? But how are you managing your stakeholders, especially when you face an obstacle and things don't go perfectly? That's part of your job as a leader. But very importantly, as a leader, you should be focusing on forward. What is next? What is out there? And so I think that, and I can speak for myself, as women, we get caught in the, oh, this deliverable didn't happen exactly as I'd planned it. X didn't happen on the exact date. This didn't happen, and then we spend so much energy on the corrective action. Whereas what would a man be doing? He'd be thinking of how do I engage and make this clear that the outcome was the best outcome that was going to come given this
yeah.
situation, and we're going to keep moving, and I'm still the right person in this role. That's why we're going to keep moving. And by the way, while I'm keeping this particular role moving, let's start talking about what's happening
How
in
my
a year
next
or
job.
two,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. But Lucy, I want to come back a minute because more and more I'm talking to lots of women who are see somethings. Okay, they're in the C
Mhm.
suite, directors. Uh, and the word I hear quite often is, "I just feel broken." Like there's a lot of fatigue. There's a lot of frustration. In terms of they've back to the point we were making earlier, they've reached this role, right? So, you wanted to be a CFO, you wanted to be a director of X, you want to be a CMO, you want to be a CEO. So they're there, right? And they're there and they're just feeling very much that it's not what they thought, right? So they're performing. This is not an issue of
Yeah.
performance, right? They're performing, but they just feel. I cannot tell you the number of women I've spoken to who just feel broken by the organization that they're in. I don't know whether it's burnout. I don't know whether it's just, wrong organization fit, but more and more I'm hearing women just say like, this is just, it's too much. I'm performing. I just don't feel right in this organization, or I just, I don't know how to describe it, but
Yeah,
there's a lot of people just, they feel tired, they feel broken, and it's beginning to manifest in different ways. And I know at some point you had a similar feeling in one of your roles. How did that manifest? What did that realization or that feeling, what did that force you to do in terms of your decision making, going forward for yourself,
yeah,
and what your future should look like?
yeah. No, really
If you don't
important.
mind sharing.
No, no, that's absolutely fine. Um, my experience has taught me that a lot of the time we get to this point of frustration, but it takes many forms. Some people have and they're burnt out. I certainly experienced some of that. Some people have their own, whether it's a mental health issue and so. But when I sit back and I unpack it, there's this expectation we have of what our hard work, high performance,
Should lead to.
progress will actually deliver.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get there and we realize that yes, it delivers some great things, great rewards, examples for others, representation matters, and so on. But it doesn't deliver the full package because a lot of us who are willing to make the effort to navigate the workplace to get to very senior executive positions want things to be different as well. We
Mm.
want things to change. We don't want the navigation pathway to be hard for every single woman coming up behind us. We feel organizations can and should be better. And also, most corporate organizations were not designed for by or for women. That's the thing, right? I remember in my previous organization bringing in a speaker, and she talked very articulately about this, an Australian woman, and she talked about how the organization was designed for the success of a type A male. That's it. That's the measure, and we've continued through decades and now centuries of you being industrialized, having corporate organizations, but still having that expectation of what success looks like. Now,
Yeah, and just so we're clear, please, we're not talking about having a crash in the
no, no,
workplace.
no, no, no. That's what I'm
Do
talking
you
about.
know what I mean? Like it's not about that,
No, it's
right?
not about that. It's not
The
about that.
infrastructure of the organization and what good looks like in the
Exactly. It's about what
organization.
good looks like in an individual. So
Yeah.
we find ways to navigate that and we're credible and we make progress. But then we get to a point where the things that also matter to us are not always evidently making changing and making positive progress. Um, and so I think in my experience, we get to there and we think, well, this isn't all of what I wanted. This is some of the things, but and it's delivered rewards, but it's not giving me all the other things.
Mm.
And so more than ever, I think women don't only want to be successful on paper and in their pockets and in their community, they want to be significant. They want the journey they've been on to matter beyond themselves.
Mm.
And what that means is that to live a journey that matters means that you make an impact that goes beyond yourself, beyond your personal benefit. And I think many of us are reaching this point and having to make this call and decision. Now, when I reached this point, I didn't have all the words that I'm giving you now for it. I didn't
Mm.
fully understand. And this was, almost 2 years ago. And I just made a decision. I just stepped away.
That's where we're going to pause for today. What an amazing conversation with Lucy so far. We've talked about entering new organizations, what that's like, defining success, and also evolving as a leader. But there's a part two. There's a part two to this conversation. And in that conversation, Lucy and I go deeper. We talk about a lot more. We talk about what happens when you finally get the CEO role. Can you imagine what happens? Your dream has finally come true. You finally got the CEO role, and how she handled the constant pressure, and how she also made a decision to step away, what that process was like for her, and what it really takes to reinvent your life and leadership. You will not want to miss it. I promise you. We talk about everything, everything. Join us for part two coming really soon on Don't Let the Smile Fool You. Thank you for listening to the Don't Let the Smile Fool You podcast. I hope you found it really, really interesting. But more importantly, I hope you're still smiling. See you soon.